Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to, well, the last edition of the Internet Governance Briefing for this year. November has been quite lively, and there are some still things to happen in December, but let's run straight into it. I'm happy to introduce my colleagues today with me. Marco in the background helping with the chat moderation. That means you should remain quite active in the chat, and we'll try to provoke you from time to time. My colleagues Andreana, Pavlina, and Katarina will help us with the covering some of the main trends of the month. Jovan will provide some reflections. Certainly Sorina, Arvin, and all the team behind the preparations of this event. I will just remind or sketch the outline of the session for those of you that might be for the first time with us. We'll firstly run through the main developments, main events in November. Then we'll go through details of the main policy developments and focus on some of the main trends. We'll also ask you what you think that for you were the main key developments of the month. We'll then look what's coming when it comes to events in December, and particularly what Deploy the GIP is offering to you in December. And then lastly, finish with a round of regional updates after the global ones, the regional updates, which always provide quite some interesting food for thought and diversity across different regions. We can start already with the overview of the main events in November. As expected, everything turned to be online. Certainly the highlight, and we'll spend some more time on that, is the Internet Governance Forum 2020 that took place online over even a couple of weeks time. We also had the Paris Peace Forum, again, this time entirely online. The OECD Global Blockchain Policy Forum, the first conference, the Alliance of the Computer Emergency Response Teams. Then the Open-Ended Working Group third round of informal virtual meetings. G20 2020 Leaders Summit, there was also a declaration that came out of that. Data 2025, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise annual 5th meeting, also online, actually starting today, so you might join. And African IGF, which is also starting tomorrow. If there is anything that we might have missed, the chat is there, let us know, and then we can certainly feature that as well. In the meantime, let's look at what were the main developments in November, which is again what we call a barometer, trying to feel the pressure of different issues in the digital policy sphere. We start with the global IG architecture, and certainly the single most interesting and probably most important development of November in this regards is the 15th Internet Governance Forum, which concluded with a call for global unity to bridge digital divides. Deploy the GIP has provided extensive coverage of all the sessions from the IGF, and we have also published the final report from the IGF. So I encourage you to turn to the Digital Watch Observatory and run through. It's a nice reading with a morning coffee of what has actually happened over the IGF with quite some commentaries. But I would use the opportunity of having Jovan with us to maybe comment briefly on, well, is the IGF becoming a digital commonplace? What we might expect from the IGF Plus, which came out of this high-level panel on digital cooperation by the Secretary General. What are the updates when it comes to tech bargaining and so on? Jovan, the floor is yours.
Hi, Vlada. That's great to reconnect, and you pointed correctly to one development which is increasingly important. There are more and more articles on some sort of global digital infrastructure or governance structure. exactly when the IGF was closing last week, there was a briefing in The Economist discussing the global tech bargain and discussing two proposals, one by Center for International Relations and the other from the one American NGO, New Security, American Security Agency. They basically advanced proposals for the global tech architecture based on like-minded countries. Therefore, the discussion is really going to pick up, and we will follow up closely, and we'll prepare the summary of these proposals. But in brief, both proposals are more exclusive, connecting like-minded countries, mainly Western democracies. In one proposal, 10 countries, some sort of D10, and trying to develop quite comprehensive governance architecture around this small club, including privacy, security, data protection. You will receive detailed analysis in our newsletter. What is still advantage of the IGF Plus in this, let's say, competition for ideas and concept is that it is well tested. Other initiatives are just drawing on the board. It has global legitimacy by the UN. It is multi-stakeholder and inclusive, and it's becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. IGF has been since November 2015, we just celebrated 15 years, some sort of orphan, policy orphan, nobody was extremely enthusiastic about the IGF. And because everybody in the Tunis negotiation got just a bit of what they wanted on the governance issues. And there are paradoxes in life, but maybe this orphan can become the place where reasonable discussions can happen, discussions which are inclusive, which are informed, and which are impactful. Therefore, in the follow-up, in the newsletter, we'll analyze these various proposals, including the latest Chinese proposal, which was issued at the Wujian conference a few days ago. Therefore, field is getting busy. There is a competition for ideas and concepts, and I'm sure the community which is following our briefings can add a lot in terms of history, intellectual inputs, and practical expertise. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. And you provoked, I think, the participants as well. So go ahead with your comments. And I particularly would like to hear, well, we would like to hear what are your highlights of the IGF 2020. So feel free to post in the chat, and then we can just skim through and see what are the main highlights. But I have a quick sub-question for you, Jovan. Since I understand that this sort of a tech bargaining proposals are more or less Western focused. And then you also mentioned that there is a Chinese or Eastern focus set of initiatives. Do you see the IGF Plus as a possible place where these could, meet in a constructive manner?
Definitely, there is element of paradox because nobody is extremely enthusiastic about the IGF, but exactly because of the weakness of the IGF, it may become the place where the convergences can happen. Because these proposals are either rather vague, like latest Chinese proposals, or too specific, like proposal by Center for International Relations, and too exclusive. One can argue that few states can get together, 10 or 15 states, and make some sort of agreement and make things moving. This is happening to some extent in WTO with e-commerce negotiation, but one has to be careful with regard to two aspects. First, it is not inclusive. None of these initiatives are as inclusive as they should be. Second, even if the substantive proposals coming out of them are good and relevant, countries, especially big countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, are very reluctant to join something which was negotiated by somebody else. We have mixed record with the Budapest Convention. While Budapest Convention de facto introduced substantive rules which are followed all over the world on cybercrime, some countries have the substantive objections, like Russia, they have object on a few norms, but there are other countries which say, hey, we didn't participate in negotiation of this, why should we join it? Therefore, there are real concerns if you make this club approach and start with a smaller group and move on. Although one can always use argument of efficiency, you have to move somehow. But I think IGF Plus, with diverse geometry, with the actors that may promote some ideas, can provide even that flexibility. With some ideas, people can move on in discussion on, and then others can join. Over.
We'll watch closely on that, and certainly, again, comments are most welcomed on the IGF Plus and the perspective of this global IG architecture. Thanks, Glenn, for sharing your highlights. And it's good to see that e-learning in schools and education still is very visible at the IGF. I've followed a couple of other sessions related to cybersecurity norms and so on, and everywhere capacity building and education was one of the key. So that's good to see. Again, I encourage you to share your thoughts. In the meantime, let's move on. The next block of topics is related to sustainable development. Something to maybe highlight is that Australia's Digital Transformation Agency launched a public consultation on a digital identity legislation that will expand digital ID users in the country. The agency makes the case for an integrated system that would reduce costs for individuals, businesses, and the economy, and some of the issues for which views are being sought include safeguards for the identity of users, governance of the whole program, as well as interaction of the global or the digital ID programs with other policies, programs, laws, and so on. At the same time, it's interesting to know that Nigeria, the federal government of Nigeria, has approved a policy for digital identity for internally displaced persons. Issuing digital IDs to displaced persons will address the problem of lack of documentation, which denies them access to education, employment, travel, and other opportunities. Moving on to security, there is a part of this set of updates which we'll cover in more details in a trend in a minute. But one of the interesting updates is that the UN, the First Committee of the United Nations, has adopted the two competing resolutions on cyberspace and international security. Basically, the first one, sponsored by Russia, relates to ICT and international security. It basically calls for a new open-ended working group starting as of 2021, and that should be in place by 2025. So as soon as this current open-ended working group ends, the new one should start. It also calls for some thematic subgroups within the open-ended working group, interaction with other stakeholders, and so on. At the same time, the other competing resolution that was adopted was sponsored by the USA and its partners, and it basically calls for or decides that the General Assembly will consider the outcomes of the GGE, the Group of Governmental Experts, and the open-ended working group at the conclusions of both of those processes, which is actually next autumn in a way, once the GGE ends its mandate as well, and that the Assembly will decide thereafter on the future work if it is needed. So they are indeed conflicting, one saying we go on with the open-ended working group, the other one saying we don't decide on anything until the GG ends its mandate. We'll see what happens with that, with a number of other proposals like this program of action by France and data security initiative by China. We'll see how this follow-up moves. Moving on to the number of updates related to combating terrorism. Well, basically, we have seen some of the terrorist attacks in the EU. This has driven a number of pushes within the EU, but they will most certainly spill over globally to combat terrorism, including some aspects of encryption. And there I pass the screen to Andriana to brief us on what's happening in this field. Andriana.
Thank you for the floor, Vlada. Last month, the EU member states announced they will finalize by the end of the year the regulation on terrorist content online. The so-called Tco Regulation was actually proposed in September 2018. And this announcement now in November came from the EU Home Ministers following the recent terrorist attacks in Europe. It was issued on November 13th, which happens to be the 5th anniversary of the Paris terrorist attacks. The ambition of the minister is to create a new and effective operational instrument, and it's supposed to serve cross-border elimination of terrorist content. So it all boils down to one sentence. States would be able to issue content removal orders with cross-border effect, and internet platforms would be required to act upon those within an hour of it being reported. Well, an hour or less. Now, one key area of disagreement here is whether cross-border removal orders should be reviewed by the authorities in the home state or host member state before they take effect. Now, some argue that this is needed to ensure human rights frameworks and ensure that no errors are made. And on the other hand, others claim that this could defeat the entire purpose of these orders being cross-border, and it could delay the removal of such content. And earlier in the month, senior members of the European People's Party actually called on the EU Council and the Parliament to urgently break the political stalemate over the regulation. And EPP noted there is a workable practical solution, which in their opinion would include the tacit confirmation of removal orders instead of active confirmation by the host member state. And the same joint statement also notes that the Council must consider the matter of data encryption. And why is that? So that digital evidence can be lawfully collected and used by the competent authorities while the trustworthiness of the products and services that are based on encryption is maintained. And it was noted that this is important in combating terrorism. However, a few days before the statement came out, the draft Council resolution on encryption was already leaked to the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, and it is titled Security Through Encryption and Security Despite Encryption. The title is telling enough. The draft resolution reiterates strong support for encryption, but it also requires enabling law enforcement access to content in a readable and usable format where authorization is lawfully issued. With this, the EU has moved somewhat closer to the Five Eyes position and the call that the Five Eyes issued earlier this autumn. That call also supports encryption, but it invites companies to actively cooperate with states to find ways to allow law enforcement authorities to access the encrypted evidence. According to Euroactiv, this encryption resolution will be adopted in December. This is an ambitious timeline that the ministers have decided all in all. And should both regulations be adopted in December, that most likely means that this trend will be one of the three we will cover in January. So stay tuned for the continuation. Over to you, Vlado.
Thank you, Andriana. I note Richard's comment on that appears that, as you mentioned, that the EU might seek to weaken encryption. He offered the Eyes of Switzerland position on that matter. It is interesting to note I've participated in some of the open discussions of the EU recently on exactly this sort of a balance between the law enforcement access to data and encryption. And most positions, at least in the EU, that I could figure out were not towards weakening encryption. They were towards let's find a way to be able to get to the evidences and let's engage companies more in that dialogue. And the companies didn't push back on discussing that, but they were more or less so clear that it could be too dangerous to weaken encryption. The problem is, of course, the tech community says you can't actually access the data unless you weaken the encryption. But let's see what will come out. Maybe a constructive discussion may actually emerge to find ways around how to help law enforcement agencies while not weakening encryption. Quick maybe question back to you really briefly, Andriana. What are the human rights implications of these moves when it comes to terrorism?
Well, Vlado, when it comes to the first resolution, which is the so-called Tco Regulation, it's quite a myriad of issues that have been brought forward by human rights organizations and by the UN special rapporteurs. They say that the definition of terrorist content is very broad, and this might turn into limiting freedom of expression. And then there's the lack of judicial review of these orders. There is no appeal mechanisms for removal orders. And there is the risk that platforms may just decide to preemptively remove content or just develop automated tools to cope with the requirement to remove in 1 hour, and effectively they could over-censor the content. And when it comes to the second resolution you pointed out, you can't weaken encryption for the bad guys without weakening it for the good guys as well. So again, freedom of expression concerns, privacy and data protection concerns, etc. Back to you.
Thanks. Well, following on that, and there'll definitely be more and more discussions in light of the Five Eyes calls, and then the EU now, and possible new resolution or policy documents will follow on that. I'm noticing the great discussion of the IGF in the chat. Please continue. We'll try to save some time at the end to maybe for Jovan to reflect on the inputs that you've provided. But let's move on now with e-commerce and the internet economy. There were a couple of interesting updates, but many of them actually somehow relate to antitrust investigation against Google, anti-competitive behavior by tech companies in China, antitrust charges against Amazon and the European Commission. So I'll pass the screen to Pavlina to summarize quickly this trend of antitrust actions against tech companies. Pavlina, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Vlada, and welcome everyone. So I'll try to be brief because it seems that this month a flurry of antitrust activity came to the surface. So at the end of October, the US Congress unveiled the antitrust report about Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, that each of them is holding monopoly power and that parts of their businesses should be broken up. And similar accusations are trending in other countries as well. And there are four main reasons governments are opening antitrust inquiries and proceedings against GAFA. So I'll try to sketch four of the main ones. And the first is the unfair competition issues, when Google, Amazon, and Apple mostly are prioritizing own products and services over those of competitors and dominate the advertising market. So in the current case, one is in the United States, the Department of Justice against Google. And the Department of Justice alleged that Google is using its market position and contract scheme to exclude its competitors from the online advertising market. And Google had the opportunity, but did not ask for the case to be dismissed as unfounded, and is expected to argue the whole case in full. Within the European Union, European Commission filed antitrust charges against Amazon, claiming that the company has unfairly used marketplaces' sellers' data to harm their businesses. And the European Commission is also looking into Amazon's buy box tool to determine whether the company, meaning the Amazon, is giving preference to its own products. The industry is not quiet either. So a group of 165 companies and industry groups filed a complaint to the European Commission seeking harder antitrust enforcement against Google this time for giving preferential treatment to their own products and services on the Google platform. Now, Great Britain is also opening a competition inquiry into Google for dominance in online advertising. And on the other market, which is China, new draft rules have been released defining what constitutes anti-competitive behavior for the first time ever. And this regulation is targeted at Chinese tech companies like Alibaba, Tencent, or Pinduoduo. And the new proposal includes definitions of anti-competitive behavior, price discrimination among customers, preferential treatment for merchants who sign exclusive agreements, and many more. Another issue the regulators do not like, and there's a lot of controversy around it, is payment through Google and Apple Pay, where the tech companies are under scrutiny for misusing their position on the online payment market this time. And a week ago or so, the Indian Competition Commission has opened an antitrust proceeding against Google for dominant position due to payment systems taking over, meaning not allowing others to process payments online. There is also underlying issues with relationship between Google Play Store and Apple Store and developers, or an ongoing battle between developers and Google and Apple worldwide, because the tech giants have a dominant position in app distribution and they charge 30% commission to the developers to have an app in the store and sell through there. So as a result of these developments and pressure on tech companies, Apple has now lowered the developer fee to 15% for those smaller developers who have revenue under $1 million a year. And the last issue I will mention is the issue of tech companies like Apple, Amazon, and Google to large sets of user data. The antitrust proceedings do not only concern financial and economic dominance in the market, but they also regulate acquiring large amounts of data from users. So a known case is a merger of Google and Fitbit, for example, where Australian and EU authorities launched an in-depth investigation of impacts of this merger onto the market and dominance of the tech. So all these procedures and investigations are expected to last for another coming months. So we will come back to them in our next internet governance briefings, probably in the spring, I would say. Thank you, Vlada.
Thank you, Pavlina. It seems like this is not only a US and EU trend anymore. The antitrust and the anti-competitive behavior is being dealt with around the world. We'll certainly follow more on that, and you can always refer to the Digital Watch updates in this regards. My camera seemed to freeze, but it should be okay now. Moving on to digital rights, where we have a couple of interesting updates. One is related to famous or infamous activist Max Schrems. He and his digital rights group has filed 2 complaints in Spain and Germany against Apple over ID generated on iPhones. Basically, the Apple's identifier for advertisers apparently allows Apple and advertisers to track users across various apps and to collect information for more personalized targeted advertising. Users can reset the identifier and prevent individual apps from using it, but the group argues that the mere generation of the code breaches the EU e-privacy directive because it created without users' consent and knowledge. Apple denied and arguing that the purpose of these identifiers is to give users greater control for whether they want to allow apps to track them. At the same time, in Canada, the Canadian Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry has presented new draft legislation to strengthen the country's privacy and data protection regulatory framework. The proposed Digital Charter Implementation Act is intended to strengthen privacy rights by introducing new elements, such as meaningful consent, the obligation for companies to obtain consent for data processing through clear language, data mobility, disposal of personal information, and algorithmic transparency. The new law would significantly increase fines for companies in case of privacy violations up to 5% of the global revenue, or 25 million, whatever is greater, for the most serious offenses. The Privacy Commissioner would also be granted the ability to force an organization to comply with the legislation and order a company to stop collecting data or using personal information. Moving on to jurisdiction and legal issues, TikTok, back in the story, TikTok as the owner of ByteDance, filed a petition against the US President's executive order that required the company to divest its US assets by 12th of November. the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US extended the divestiture deadline until 27th of November. This year, the US government appealed the court decision which blocked the TikTok ban from coming into force on 12th of November. Briefly looking at infrastructure updates, where we have Alphabet's project Tara, which is working with the partners in Kenya to deliver high-speed connectivity via beams of light. And at the same time, Huawei filed an appeal against Swedish telecom regulators' decision to exclude the company from 5G network in Sweden, something that probably we could have expected. And finally, moving to new technologies, IoT, artificial intelligence, two interesting updates. The Freedom Online Coalition, group of 32 now countries committed to protection of human rights online, has issued a statement on artificial intelligence and human rights, calling on states to refrain from the use of AI systems for repressive and authoritarian purposes. Among other elements, the statement also asks for international multi-stakeholder cooperation in the development of relevant norms, rules, and standards for procurement, development, use and governance of the AI systems that are consistent with international human rights law. The US White House issued guidance to federal agencies to consider when developing regulatory approaches to AI applications. Agencies are asked, among others, to consider new regulations only after carefully assessing whether existing or evolving regulatory framework are sufficient to avoid hampering artificial intelligence innovations and growth, and to contribute to the public trust in AI by promoting reliable robots and trustworthy AI applications that do not pose risk to fundamental rights and freedoms. There is a set of updates also related to facial recognition. So facial recognition is again under the spotlight. So I pass the spotlight to Katarina to brief us on this trend related to facial recognition. Katarina.
Thank you, Vlada. Before I start with the main three developments we saw this month, perhaps just to say, this is obviously not a new topic. We know that around facial recognition technology and some of the applications, there is bias and discrimination. There are concerns about human rights. We know that in some jurisdictions, the use of facial recognition technology, FRT, has been banned, especially in the context of law enforcement. And we also see a lot of discussion around the use of FRT in public spaces. This brings me to the first example of developments this month, which is the campaign Reclaim Your Face, which has been launched by a consortium of NGOs, among them Access Now and Privacy International. And they're very critical of the use of facial recognition technology in the public space. They call for greater transparency of the local authorities as well as law enforcement authorities on the use of facial recognition technology. And they basically raise concerns about this kind of biometric use in the public space of people who are not under any, under any suspicion. Then moving from a debate that is very focused on Europe to the US. In Portland, voters have voted to ban the use of facial recognition technology by law enforcement agencies and other local authorities. And this ban will be in place for at least 5 years. And I think this is also a good reminder that we've seen similar developments in other jurisdictions in the United States. So what comes to mind is San Francisco, Auckland, California as a whole, also New Hampshire. Which also brings me to another example where Los Angeles police has been banned from using external facial recognition technology. And this comes after it has been found that police officers have been using the software Clearview AI. Perhaps last but not least, let me mention the Freedom Online Coalition, who calls on states to refrain from the use of facial recognition technology and other AI systems for repressive and authoritarian purposes. Back to you, Vlada.
Thanks, Katarina. I wonder, in all this sort of crazy field of facial recognition, what are the stances of the companies? How do they position themselves towards this, at least the big ones, towards this issue?
So for quite a while, the big companies are actually calling for regulation on facial recognition technology. And in particular, the idea is here regulation instead of an outright ban. And so we've seen statements from Microsoft and IBM this year, again, kind of reiterating this call for regulation and kind of saying that both companies stand ready to kind of work on this process of developing adequate regulation that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms. As I said, this is not really a new development, but I think it's interesting to see that these companies, again, kind of make this issue this statement. So I think we have to see how this develops, because I said this has been going on for quite a while, and we're still quite a far way away, I would say, from actually having this regulation.
Thanks, Kat. We'll certainly follow more closely, and for all of you again, the reminder that if you wish to dive into more details of updates of any of these fields, feel free to visit the Digital Watch Observatory, and you'll find specific updates on each of the issues. I see that the discussion on IGF is moving on. I'll use the opportunity before we switch back to Jovan to summarize that, to ask you to vote for your top developments of the month. So we'll put up the poll, which basically selects a number of issues, but there might be others that you find are critical ones. So you can maybe cast a vote to these that we offered, but feel free to add any other top digital policy development in November in the chat. And while doing that, I'll go on with reviewing what's coming next month, and then we'll switch back to a little bit more on discussion on the IGF, so you still have some more time to reflect in the chat. Let's look at what's ahead while you're voting. The vote can still stay on. Let's look what's ahead of us, well, the events next month in December. Firstly, the open-ended working group that was also mentioned in the chat. It has a 4th round of informal virtual meetings. And there is also an initiative by a number of states plus companies to organize a series, informal multi-stakeholder virtual dialogue series on the open-ended working group pre-draft. It is not part of the official process, but it goes hand in hand, and the states that were pushing that, about 20 or even more states behind that, sort of obliged, committed to transmit the messages from these open discussions back to the open-ended working group discussions on the pre-draft. We also have the Future of Work Summit, which is coming, the Women in ICT, in IT Summit and Awards Asia, the 3rd session of the group of governmental experts on cybersecurity and cyber and international security. And then interesting to note, the Trinidad and Tobago IGF, it's always good to underline some of the local events which are coming. I encourage you to share your events as well. If there is anything that we missed, we'll be gladly adding that to the Digital Watch overview of the events. You can always get back to see more details about these upcoming events. So feel free to let us know what's coming other than what we mentioned. I'll look at the poll. The poll says the top digital development is the First Committee adopts competing resolutions on open-ended working group and the GGE, sort of again competing in the UN. But then the second place is shared by the Digital Cooperation in focus of the IGF, the EU to finalize regulation on terrorist content online, and the US Senate passes the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act. Again, if there is anything else you want to share of your own impressions, to share it in the chat. And let's just look briefly, I think we can close the poll, briefly at what's coming in December from Diplo and the GIP. Quite some interesting bits before the New Year's celebrations. Finally getting into 2021, I think it was enough of this year. 25th of November, we have the Rights On, the Wednesday web chat on Our Voice, placing children and their rights at the center of drive towards a better, greener world. Then we have on 26th of November, quite early morning, but still hopefully useful, a high-level event, digital security and economic recovery, boosting confidence and productivity through secure digital technology. We have as guest speakers, the Federal Council Minister for Finance of Switzerland. We have the CEO of Kaspersky, Eugen Kaspersky. We have Vice President of Microsoft, high representatives of Huawei and UBS Bank. So it'll be quite interesting. It'll be the panel will be moderated by Jovan. On 30th of November, finally, the launch of the Geneva Digital Atlas. We're trying to map all the actors and their main field of work in Geneva. It'll be very interesting, so I encourage you to join. On 1st of December, web debate, diplomacy in times of COVID, and of course, 26th of January, the next IG briefing. We're skipping one in December, you will understand. We have the newsletter which are coming, the monthly newsletter of the Digital Watch, also the weekly digest. So now we have the weekly digest. I encourage you to follow and subscribe. And the courses, the application deadlines for the postgraduate diploma in contemporary diplomacy, application deadline for Diplo's winter courses, and the deadline for online meeting and conferences online course, something new in our offer, which appears to be very, very interesting. There's a lot of interest in how to conduct online and hybrid meetings in future. Obviously, we might need to organize an event on the future of IGF, but I'll pass the floor now to Jovan to try to summarize different positions in the chat that we had. Jovan, I don't know whether you can be brief. Let's see.
Yeah, I will try, and it's very interesting discussion. Again, we have inputs from Yanis, Savri, Marcus, Richard. And what is coming out of Rachel, and I'm sorry if I missed anyone, what is coming from this discussion is I would say, summarize in a few questions. The first question, is there a gap in digital governance, real or perceived? What we are seeing with this economist coverage and reports and proposals coming from different corners of the world, it seems that there is obvious gap. Now, how this gap will be filled, whether it will be filled by few countries, whether by business or by some body like IGF, which has mileage, legitimacy, expertise, and inbuilt way to deal with anti-captioning attempts through transparency, inclusion, and other processes. I triggered this discussion with this point that in my view, the IGF Plus is by far the best candidate to make this inclusive, impactful, and informed decisions because of, among others, its weaknesses and its inbuilt contradiction that exists since the beginning of the IGF. And some were mentioned by Richard and Marcus on the mandate. Is it GA or SG? It is not a perfect solution. It is a solution with many weaknesses. In all analysis, and we'll publish a few analyses, by far probably the most advanced comparing to other proposals which are on the drawing board. Therefore, this is the first question. If there is a gap, how to fill this gap? Is IGF Plus solution to fill this gap? That's simple. In my view, if IGF does not step up its efforts to this challenge, it will most likely become irrelevant in the coming years. And that's probably that's even selfishly, personally, sort of a regret, because all of us in this meeting, most of us have put a lot of efforts in IGF, but I think that it is also a question of public good. IGF is a public good, and it should be preserved by all of us. There are different views. Avri was worried that it may be captured by the UN. There was a metaphor that it was on the arm's length Marcus introduced when it was designed, but then the question is, how long is now this arm? There was discussion between Marcus and Richard on, is it the UNGA or UNSG Secretary General who have this mandate? Rachel posed an interesting question, which is always good logical question. What else in terms of legitimacy, inclusion, and other elements. Yanis indicated that MAG should be the central point for a broader engagement. Now, this is more or less the summary. In brief, existing gap, how to fill it, is the IGF Plus the right solution? If yes, what should be changed in the structure of the IGF to fill this gap? Over.
Light sub question. I noticed in the chat that you also mentioned the open-ended working group as one interesting modality of openness. I know it's not possible to measure, but the impression of yours, whether the IGF as it was in the last decade plus could have possibly impacted the UN to change in that direction, the open-ended working group modality might be sort of a result of this openness of the IGF. And I mean, is that something that we should be proud of, having such level of openness, even though, as you mentioned, it's not enough, as we have in the open-ended working group?
Well, let's distinguish the political aspect of discussion, open-ended work UNGG 2 resolution. That is a political, obviously, dynamics. But if one follow UNGG from 2004, more or less when IGF was discussed in working group on internet governance. Till today, you have UNGG going very intergovernmental, getting closer and closer and getting more and more exclusive club, and IGF going in complete opposite direction. It was even physically shown when there was once meeting of MAG and UNGG next to each other and heavy security at the door of UNGG. I was even thrown out because I wasn't listed as a participant. And completely open IGF. It was even visually, physically, 2 rooms in the UN, 23 and 24, and I think I have a photo. I think definitely IGF, at least based on my experience at the UN high-level panel, impacted thinking about multi-stakeholder approach, a new reality, and need to at least consult, if not involve in decisions, other actors. That's basically, I think there was impact, considerable impact on IGF. It's not that somebody copied and pasted examples from the IGF, but it created thinking that meetings, consultations can be organized in different way, and it's not necessarily less efficient. And that, I think, that's definitely influenced, let's say, tangential influence of IGF on the open-ended working group. But what I commented in discussion with the Avri is that it's always the question of half empty or half full glass. Comparing to UNGG, it is a great progress. Is it as inclusive as IGF? No, it is not, or ITF. And most likely it will never be because of specificities of security discussions and let's say states jealously protect that field of their work.
So in a nutshell, we can be satisfied, but we shouldn't be satisfied. So we should go for more, but we should be sort of happy with at least what we have now. And thanks, Christian, for sharing the link to the open-ended working group or this informal discussion, and for Mihaela Eugenia for sharing the link to the Women Tech Network Global Awards. We'll certainly look into adding that into the Digital Watch unless we already have it. There are some other comments on the IGF, but I'll leave it to the chat now to continue with that, and we'll certainly schedule maybe in the beginning of 2021 a discussion, a panel, maybe a roundtable on the future of the IGF and all these important issues. Let me now move to the regional updates. There are very interesting developments on the regional level. And there I pass the floor to Andreana to take us for a short trip around the globe if we need to do it online. Andreana.
Thanks for the floor again, Vlada. First, I will take you to the Caribbean for free. We have Andre Edwards there, and he will inform us about the Dominican Republic joining the 5G Clean Network and MasterCard and Juvo teaming up to help underbanked bill credit in Latin America and the Caribbean. Over to Andre.
Andre Edwards with Caribbean updates. Dominican Republic joins 5G Clean Network. The Foreign Minister of the Dominican Republic, Roberto Alvarez, announced that the Dominican Republic will join the United States' Clean Network Initiative which provides access to a network of telecommunications infrastructure and reliable standards of technology supply chains. This announcement followed a meeting between President Luis Abinadar and U.S. Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy and Environment, Keith Crabb, along with U.S. Ambassador Robert Bernstein. The Dominican Republic joins over 50 countries, 170 clean telecommunications companies, and many global high-tech companies in this project. Participation clears the way for increased U.S. private sector investment and strengthens mutual guarantees for like-minded partners in the region and in other parts of the world. MasterCard Juvo team up to help underbanked build credit in LATAM and the Caribbean. MasterCard is collaborating with fintech startup Juvo in a project to aid the underbanked in Latin America and the Caribbean in order to build credit histories and have access to a range of financial services. Juvo has built a financial identity as a service platform which enables customers to build a credit history through the analysis of alternative financial transactions. The customer's profile can then be used to evaluate the customer's eligibility for access to various services like purchasing insurance and taking loans. MasterCard hopes to roll out this service across the region, and the companies expect millions to now have greater access to financial services as consumers will now be better able to demonstrate creditworthiness. Juvo has used its platform to aid developing nation customers access microloans through mobile phones. Financial institutions are expected to increase the addressable market for their services at lower risk, just as the pandemic's impact on brick and mortar banks continues to drive demand for open banking regionally.
Thank you for that overview of updates from the Caribbean, Andre. Next, we have Foncham Dennis with updates from Africa. Foncham will tell us about social media regulation in Nigeria and the first National Forum on Cybersecurity and the fight against cybercrimes in Cameroon. Over to Foncham.
Greetings to everyone. This is Foncham Dennis with Internet Governance Update for the month of November for the African region. I begin in Nigeria, where Nigerian Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, used the NSAS, which was a protest to end police brutality, to convince the National Assembly of the need of social media regulation. According to the minister, fake news on social media fueled the protest, which lasted over a week and caused the death of 22 policemen and 50 others. Mohammed quoted the examples of China, where Google, Facebook, or Instagram are absent, and the case of Ethiopia, where social media was shut down for 2 days following the killing of a musician during an unrest. He said social media promotes fake news, so the National Assembly should support previous rejected bills on social media, like the bill on the protection from internet falsehood and manipulation, and the bill for the National Commission for the Protection of Hate Speech. And then in Cameroon, Minette Libob-Liken, Cameroonian Minister of Post and Telecommunication, at the first National Forum on Cybersecurity and Fight Against Cybercrimes, held from the 3rd to the 5th of November 2020, said an open and secure internet is an engine for economic growth and social development. The forum, with theme National Cyberspace and Cybersecurity Challenges, was aimed at raising awareness on cybersecurity and responsible use of social networks. She disclosed that in 2018, 3,388 cases of identity theft were registered, while in 2019, 2,500 complaints relating to scamming and phishing amounting to franc CFA 5 billion and bank fraud of franc CFA 6 billion occurred. Also, 11,617 vulnerabilities were detected on websites of public administration. The forum enables cybersecurity experts to exchange ideas and reflect on cybersecurity policies and intervention levels which can be used to secure the national cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Foncham. And now we go to the Middle East and North Africa. Hanan Boujemi will inform us about companies in the MENA region facing regulatory investigations due to poor technology integration and Saudi Arabia's new AI-based platform. Over to you, Hanan.
Good afternoon. My name is Hanan Boujami, and I will be bringing to you Diplo briefing for the month of November 2020 from the MENA region. The first brief is on a survey that was conducted recently, and it gathered opinions of over 1,500 compliance leaders, including 300 from the Middle East and North Africa. It revealed major risks associated with digitalization. So 41% of these companies admitted that the organization has already experienced enforcement investigations by regulators because of the technology that was poorly onboarded or implemented in these companies. The investigations are most likely to happen in relation to breaches in data privacy, cybersecurity, tax transfer, pricing and fraud, and antitrust. The main outcome of this survey predicts that security of tech-enabled business models and data privacy issues will now be the top priority of regulators in the region, in addition to the use perhaps of machine learning, as in AI predictive analytics, to find and deliver information, part of the compliance training and process that is designed specifically to identify concerning patterns of behavior. Now, hot off the press, pre-G20 summit taking place in Saudi Arabia today and tomorrow, the president of Saudi Data and AI Authority, Dr. Abdullah bin Sharif Al Ghamdi, provided insight into this new initiative. Istishraf platform. It's an AI-based platform that utilizes data to create diversified insights and respond to top priorities of decision makers in the country. Now, he stated that this platform generated around 11.5 billion in 2019, which is an excellent indicator of the great opportunities the technology provides. So we shall keep an eye on Saudi Arabia and its future in AI. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you for sharing, Hanan. We now go to Asia, where Amrita Chowdhury is. She will tell us more about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, then China's new antitrust rules for the tech sector, and a mobile app called Cyberteens created in Bangladesh. Amrita, over to you.
Hello and welcome to the regional update from Asia for the month of November. This month, 15 Asian countries including China, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Philippines and Malaysia signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which is the largest trade agreement in the world. This comes after 8 years of negotiations. The signatory countries represent about 30% of the world's population, of the global GDP, and nearly 28% of global trade. Expected to shape global politics and economics, the RCEP is intended to facilitate international trade by reducing tariffs and administrative requirements among the member states, regulating telecommunication services, including ICTs, intellectual property, setting up dispute settlement, and e-commerce. Notably, India is not part of this agreement and withdrew from the negotiations due to concerns over its domestic industry and the potential of widening trade deficits with member countries, especially China. Concerns over the market dominance of tech giants continues. This month, the Competition Commission of India initiated investigation over Google's market dominance in its App Store to promote its payment services, Google Pay. In China, the antitrust public authorities have released a 22-page document that defines antitrust behavior within the Chinese sector, such as Alibaba and JD.com, that account for 75% of Chinese online retail market, and proposes antitrust regulations for tech giants. Lastly, a 17-year-old Bangladeshi teenager, Sadat Rehman, has won the 2020 Kids Right International Children's Peace Prize for developing a mobile app called Cyberteens for helping teenagers to report cyberbullying and online crime in the Western District of Narel in Bangladesh. The previous winners of this prize include Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai and environmental activist Greta Thunberg. That's all from me for this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. And let me once again thank all of our curators and colleagues who shared the updates from their regions. I will now give the floor back to Vlada since our world tour is unfortunately over. Vlada, back to you.
Thank you, Andriana. I hope next year we'll be more lucky to maybe make the real tour around the world, but thus far, this is the most we can do. Before ending the webinar, I just want to thank Glenn also for mentioning the IGF in Canada starting, and Abdul Jalil mentioning the first school on internet governance in N'Djamena, Chad. Those are great developments. I think we should also share and highlight. This brings us to the end of the monthly briefing, and actually the last briefing of this year. One final reminder, the Geneva Digital Watch newsletter will be available for download on the Observatory in the next few days, so you can also read the review of what has happened in the previous month with some analysis and comments. And a reminder to join us on 26th November morning for the high-level event, Digital Security and Economic Recovery, and on 30th November for the launch of the Geneva Digital Atlas, all online, so it'll be easy for all to join. Thank you for participating today at the webinar, and see you again at the end of January, last Tuesday, 29th of January, 13 UTC, 14 Geneva time, and enjoy the holidays, and well, Happy New Year. We can be the first one to wish you. Bye-bye.